The moment the camera cut to her face, America saw it happen in real time. Her hand trembled as she reached for the cue card, the words blurred behind glassy eyes, mascara streaking down her cheek as her lips parted. But no words came. Millions of viewers watched as the once unshakable queen of primetime television fell silent. A live mic still capturing every breath of panic, every twitch of disbelief, as the audience behind her sat, frozen in collective confusion. Just moments before, she was smirking confidently across the studio table, ready to deliver yet another viral takedown. And now, she was unraveling. Live, under the lights she once ruled. The control room scrambled, producers screamed in earpieces, someone yelled, "Cut!" But it was too late. The damage was done. As the screen faded to commercial, her voice slipped through the static. Barely a whisper, but sharp as glass. That man just destroyed everything. It all started 2 nights ago, on a Tuesday evening wrapped in the usual gloss of television fakery. The studio was buzzing, cameras polished, laughter cues loaded, and a famous host, renowned for her savage one-liners and ego-driven interviews, was preparing to do what she did best: break her guest down for ratings. Her target that night? Senator John Kennedy. A man known not for fire or flash, but for his quiet strength, old soul values, and unshakable poise. They didn't invite him because they liked him. They invited him to make him squirm. The invitation had been dressed in charm. "We'd love your perspective on the state of the American spirit," they said, but behind the scenes, it was an ambush in slow motion. The host's team had already clipped a misleading soundbite from an old speech, twisted and out of context, ready to play mid-show. The teleprompter had lines scripted not for discussion, but for ridicule. They expected a quiet, courteous man to walk into their world of applause signs and pre-rehearsed burns, and crumble under the weight of performative cruelty. But when John Kennedy walked onto that stage, something shifted. He wasn't flashy. He didn't wear expensive cologne. He wore a modest suit, nodded politely to the audience, and greeted the host with a gentle, "Good evening." From the moment he sat down, her energy shifted. She leaned in with that familiar smirk, eyes sparkling with the thrill of blood in the water, waiting for the moment she'd land the first verbal jab. And land it, she did. "You've been called the most boring man in America," she said with a grin. "Do you take that as a compliment?" Kennedy didn't flinch. He smiled. "Well, I suppose if calm is boring, then I'll take it over chaos any day." The audience chuckled. Not at him, but with him. The host's smile twitched. That wasn't how it was supposed to go. Still, she pressed on. Snide remarks, loaded questions, raised eyebrows at every soft-spoken answer. And yet, Kennedy refused to play her game. He didn't argue. He didn't snap. He just sat there, answering with such grace and clarity that the air began to change. Then came the moment. The host turned to the camera, said, "Let's remind the audience who our guest really is," and cued the clip. The screen lit up behind them, showing a choppy, heavily edited video meant to make Kennedy look out of touch and condescending. It ended. Silence followed, and the host leaned in, ready to pounce. "Care to explain that, Senator?" Kennedy turned, looked not at her, but at the audience watching at home, and said softly, "That clip is missing the part where I held that mother's hand, the part where she cried because no one had listened to her story before. You cut that out, didn't you?" The host froze. A beat of silence, then another. The audience stopped clapping. Even the crew stopped moving. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice even lower now, the kind of voice that doesn't shout but strikes straight through the noise. "You brought me here thinking you'd humiliate me, but I'm not here for you. I'm here for the people watching who've been laughed at, interrupted, and told they don't belong in rooms like this." He paused, looked around, eyes clear, unwavering. If you've ever been mocked for being decent, I want you to like this video and type the number 9 in the comments, because the world needs to know we're still out here and we're not going anywhere. And just like that, the room shifted again. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't cheer. They just listened. Something real had entered the space, and for the first time in years, silence became the loudest sound on television. The silence didn't last. It cracked like ice under pressure. The host, momentarily stunned, blinked fast, her jaw clenched as she reached for her water glass, anything to steady herself. But even the sip betrayed her. Her hand trembled slightly, barely noticeable to most, but not to the millions watching in high definition. She forced a laugh, sharp and unnatural, the kind that usually reset the room. "Well," she said, voice tighter now, "that was dramatic." But the crowd didn't laugh with her. Not this time. The usual smirk she wore like armor began to slide, just a little, as Kennedy remained still, composed, and devastatingly grounded. "I don't do drama," he replied gently. "I do truth. And sometimes, truth makes people uncomfortable." That was the moment she lost the room. She leaned forward with a new tactic: force. "You come here with your little stories and calm voice, but this is television, Senator. You think you're going to fix the world with soft words and a sad tone?" She looked around, as if to pull the audience back to her side. "This show's about real talk." Kennedy's expression didn't shift. "Real talk is exactly why I came," he said. "But real doesn't mean loud, and it doesn't mean cruel. Real means listening when someone's in pain instead of turning it into entertainment." Something in her cracked. Maybe it was the line about cruelty, or maybe it was the calm way he said it, like a father gently correcting a child. Her voice shot back, this time sharper. "You think you're better than me, huh? Sitting there like some wise grandpa? Guess what? No one cares about your bedtime stories." The audience winced. Even the cameraman lowered his lens for a breath. That line cut deep, but not where she thought. Kennedy inhaled slowly. "No," he said, eyes locked on hers. "But they care about the people in those stories, because those stories are real. And they're watching." For a second, her confidence flickered, her eyes darting to the camera, the invisible millions she'd always played to. But the energy was off. The usual rhythm was gone. She wasn't in control anymore. Desperation crept into her tone. "You think you can come on my stage and make me look like the villain?" Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He didn't even blink. He just asked one question. "Why are you so angry?" And just like that, the oxygen left the room. The host froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The lights were suddenly too bright, the studio too quiet. No laugh track could save her now. The audience wasn't on her side. Not anymore. The question hung in the air like smoke, wrapping around her tightly, squeezing her chest. "I'm not angry," she muttered, but the crack in her voice said otherwise. Kennedy gave her a look, not of judgment, but of quiet understanding. "I think you are, and I think you've been carrying that for a long time. Maybe since before this show ever aired. Maybe since before someone told you the only way to be heard was to shout louder than everyone else." Her hand dropped to her lap. The cue card slipped from her fingers to the floor with a soft flutter. The sound echoed like thunder. From the corner of the studio, the stage manager tried to signal for a break, but the director shook his head. "Let it play." This was bigger than a segment now. This was live redemption, or live ruin. The host leaned back in her chair, her eyes suddenly distant. "I built this show from nothing," she said quietly, no longer performing. People didn't take me seriously. They laughed at me. So I laughed louder, hit harder, made them feel smaller so they'd stop making me feel that way. She looked at him, voice cracking. And it worked, until now. Kennedy didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply said, "It doesn't have to end like this." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. At that exact moment, someone in the audience stood up. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, holding a notebook. "I came here tonight to watch a takedown," she said, voice steady. "But I think we all just saw something braver than that. We saw what happens when someone refuses to play the game and wins anyway." Applause broke out. Not thunderous, not performative, but real. Hands clapping not out of entertainment, but respect. The host sat in silence, breath shaking, her image unraveling in front of a nation. And behind the cameras, in a control booth filled with producers and assistants and executive decision-makers, someone whispered what no one had dared to say aloud. "She's done." And she knew it. The next morning, the internet didn't wake up. It exploded. By sunrise, the clip of the live broadcast was everywhere. But it wasn't a scandal in the traditional sense. It wasn't a hot mic catching profanity or a politician dodging questions. It was something far rarer, a televised reckoning that felt honest. The headlines wrote themselves. Senator Kennedy silences host without saying a word. When kindness dismantled ego on national TV, TV host breaks down, and America watched every tear. And the views? Over 12 million in the first 6 hours. In coffee shops, on subways, in group chats and office break rooms, people weren't talking about the latest viral dance or celebrity feud. They were talking about that moment, the stillness, the silence, the look on Senator Kennedy's face when he asked, "Why are you so angry?" It had pierced more than just the host. It had pierced something in everyone. Back at the network, chaos reigned. The host's name had become trending hashtags, but not in celebration. The executive board held an emergency meeting, not because she had said something outrageous, but because she had lost control of the moment. Worse, she had become the story. And in television, when you're supposed to be the narrator, being the story is the kiss of death. A spokesperson issued a statement by noon. "We are currently reviewing the events of last night's broadcast. At this time, our host has chosen to step away from the show temporarily. But no one believed that temporarily meant anything but permanent. The damage was done, not by scandal, but by something far more damning in the court of public opinion. Exposure. For years, the audience had accepted the sarcasm, the scripted cruelty, the witty takedowns, because they were part of the show. But once the curtain fell, once the script collapsed and the woman behind the mask wept in front of a nation, the world saw her for who she truly was. Not a villain, not a monster, but someone deeply wounded who had made a career out of wounding others. Meanwhile, Senator Kennedy wasn't celebrating. In fact, he hadn't even watched the clip. His team had sent it, but he chose not to press play. Instead, he sat at a small cafe in Baton Rouge, reading through letters, real, handwritten letters, from constituents, as he did every Friday. But this Friday was different. The waitress recognized him instantly. "You're him," she whispered, placing a cup of coffee on his table. "The man from the interview." Her voice wavered. I've never seen someone stand their ground like that without raising their voice." Kennedy looked up and offered a warm, tired smile. "Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stay calm?" She paused. "Can I ask, how did you do it? I mean, not lose your temper? She was awful to you." He stirred his coffee gently, thoughtful. "I didn't come to fight her. I came to speak for the people who've been silenced. If I'd shouted back, I'd be proving her right. But if I stayed steady, maybe someone watching at home would remember what dignity looks like." She nodded, visibly emotional. "Well, I remembered. So thank you." That afternoon, a voicemail arrived. Unknown number. The message was short. A woman's voice, rough but steady. "Senator Kennedy, it's me. I know you don't owe me anything, but if you're willing, I'd like to talk. Not on camera, just talk." He listened twice, then set the phone down. He didn't respond right away. Not because he was hesitant, but because he understood that some moments need space to breathe. 2 days later, they met in a quiet corner of a city park. No cameras, no security. Just two people sitting on opposite sides of a bench, the rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children filling the silence. She was dressed simply. No makeup, no performance. Just a woman stripped of spotlight, finally facing the truth. "I lost everything," she said quietly. "You lost the show," Kennedy corrected gently. "You haven't lost everything. Not yet." She looked at him, eyes rimmed red but steady. "Why didn't you humiliate me? You could have. You had every right." He shrugged. "I wasn't there to win. I was there to be heard." She nodded slowly. "Well, you were. And I wasn't the only one listening." They sat in silence for a long while after that. Not uncomfortable silence, healing silence, the kind that follows truth when all the shouting is done. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, she turned to him again. "Can I ask a favor?" "Depends on the favor," he said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "My final show. The unedited version, all of it. There's something in there I need people to see. Not for me, but for them." He took the drive, looked at it, then back at her. "I'll watch it," he said. "And if there's truth in it, I'll help you share it, but only the truth. No edits, no angles. No more masks," she added. He smiled. No more masks. The file sat untouched on his desk for hours. Senator Kennedy stared at it, the small flash drive no bigger than his thumb, but somehow heavier than any policy paper or amendment he'd handled that week. The weight wasn't in the plastic. It was in the intention. It wasn't a stunt. It wasn't spin. It was a confession handed over in the most vulnerable way possible. Not with an apology, but with a chance. A chance to be seen again, truthfully this time. He finally plugged it in just after midnight, alone in his study, the house quiet, the air still. The screen flickered to life. No intro music, no laugh track, no sharp angles or cutaways. Just her, sitting in the same chair under the same studio lights, but without makeup, without an audience, without any script. The red light of the camera glowed, and for once she wasn't performing. She was just talking. And what she said didn't shock him, but it moved him. She spoke of years spent building a career on the armor of mockery, how it was safer to attack than to be ignored, how her entire self-worth had become entangled in applause, ratings, retweets. "I confused cruelty with charisma," she said, voice raw. "I thought dominance meant respect, but when you didn't flinch, when you didn't fight me, it was like you held up a mirror, and for the first time I hated what I saw in it." For 40 minutes she unraveled. Not for pity, not for redemption, but for truth. And at the end of the footage, she looked directly into the lens and whispered, "If even one person watching this can feel less alone, then maybe all that pain wasn't wasted." Kennedy sat in silence for a long time after the video ended. The next morning, he called a press conference, not to attack, not to gloat, but to share what he believed America needed to see. No spin, no sound bites, just the raw, uncut monologue of a woman who once wielded a microphone like a weapon. now using it like a lifeline. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The video went viral in less than 3 hours. But this time, it wasn't outrage that filled the comment sections. It was reflection. Viewers wrote in, "I've been her. I've torn people down to feel taller. This feels like healing." News outlets ran headlines not about downfall, but about rebuilding. Podcasts debated not who was right or wrong, but how public forgiveness could be real if it was earned. And somewhere in all that noise, something rare happened. Empathy went viral. Later that week, she appeared again. Not on a stage, not behind a desk, but sitting beside Kennedy at a community town hall event in New Orleans. No announcement, no posters, just folding chairs and open hearts. Kennedy stepped up first. "I never imagined I'd be here with her," he said, nodding toward his former adversary. "But maybe that's exactly the point. Growth doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like sitting next to the person who once tried to silence you and choosing to listen anyway." Then he handed her the mic. Her hands shook, but she didn't let go. "I spent most of my career speaking," she said, voice steady. "But I rarely hurt anyone, not really. I came here today not to reclaim anything, but to lay something down. My pride." Someone in the crowd shouted, "We forgive you!" And the room erupted in applause. Not polite, not forced, but real. The kind of applause that doesn't celebrate perfection, but the courage to change. As the event wrapped, a young girl approached them, maybe 13, maybe younger. She looked at the former host, then at Kennedy, and said, "That night on TV, it made me want to be kind, even when people are mean. 'Cause maybe they're hurting too." Kennedy smiled, his voice soft. "That's the whole truth, sweetheart." Later that evening, they sat on the steps outside the venue, watching the sky turn violet. No reporters, no flashes, just the hum of a city exhaling. She turned to him, tired but lighter than before. "You think they'll ever forget what happened?" He paused. "I hope they don't," he said. "Not because of what you did, but because of what we all saw, that people can fall, hard, publicly, and still rise again, if they're willing to do it honestly." She nodded, quiet. "Thank you for not finishing me." "You finished yourself," he said gently. "But you also started over." A beat passed. She smiled for the first time in days. This one real. "Guess that's the first good ending I've ever had," she said. Kennedy looked out over the horizon, the last light fading. "Maybe it's not an ending," he replied. "Maybe it's just the part where the real story begins." The next week, something unexpected happened. Not a viral tweet, not another headline, not even a scandal. Something quieter, deeper. In cities across the country, people began gathering, not in protest, but in conversation. Small events sprung up in libraries, coffee shops, churches, even bus stops. They weren't organized. They weren't flashy. Just groups of strangers sitting together, replaying that night's broadcast and asking a simple but powerful question. What would I have done in her place? Senator Kennedy never planned for that reaction. He didn't believe in overnight revolutions, but he did believe in the ripple effect of truth. And now those ripples were reaching people he'd never met, in places he'd never visit. One morning, his assistant walked into his office, a stack of letters in her arms and tears in her eyes. "You should read these," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He did. One was from a former corporate executive who admitted to building a career on intimidation. "I never realized how much I was hiding behind my power until I watched her break down on live TV," he wrote. "Now I want to lead differently." Another was from a high school student who used to bully classmates online. "I thought sarcasm made me cool, but after watching you stay kind when she came at you like that, I felt ashamed. I deleted my old posts. I'm starting over. And another, from a retired teacher. You reminded me that teaching isn't just about the mind, it's about the heart. I forgot that. Thank you for reminding me. Kennedy sat back in his chair, his thumb brushing the edge of one of the envelopes. This wasn't about him. It never was. The story had outgrown the stage. It had become a mirror, held up to the public, to reflect who we were and who we could be. But not everyone was ready to look into that mirror. Late one evening, a network executive called him privately. The voice on the other end was clipped, polite, but clearly guarded. "Senator," the man said, "we're planning to relaunch the show. New name, new format, clean slate." "I see," Kennedy replied. "We'd like your blessing, and possibly your participation. A short segment. You'd speak about moving forward." Rebuilding Kennedy's silence lingered. The executive tried again. "It's a chance to show unity, to control the narrative. People love a redemption arc." That's when Kennedy spoke, calm and direct. "Redemption isn't a segment," he said. "It's a choice, a process, and it doesn't happen on cue." The executive sighed. "So, is that a no?" "It's a not yet," Kennedy replied. "Let the story breathe. Let the people sit with what they saw. If you rush forgiveness, it becomes branding. Let it be human." The line went quiet, and then the call ended. The next day, Kennedy appeared at a university to speak, not to the press, not to lawmakers, but to a hall full of journalism students. The room buzzed with anticipation, phones already raised, but he didn't step behind the podium. He pulled up a chair, sat among them. "I'm not here to lecture," he said. "I'm here to ask you what kind of truth you want to chase." One student raised their hand. "Do you think the host deserves a second chance?" Kennedy smiled faintly. "I think we all do. But second chances aren't guaranteed. They're earned. And what you do with them, that's your legacy." Another asked, "What was going through your mind when she tried to tear you down?" His eyes softened. "I saw someone in pain, and I reminded myself that hurting people hurt people. So I made a choice not to become part of the cycle." He looked around the room, at all the eager faces still learning how to carry the weight of words. "Your voice will always be your power," he said. "But your restraint, your grace, that's your character, and people remember character more than they remember headlines." By the end of the session, students weren't just clapping, they were thinking, writing, reflecting. Outside, as Kennedy walked toward his car, a young man jogged up to him, nervous, holding a notebook tight to his chest. "Senator," he said breathlessly, "I just wanted to say, I grew up watching her. I used to think that's what strength looked like. But after watching you, I realized strength can be quiet." Kennedy paused, then nodded slowly. "The loudest voices aren't always the strongest," he said. "Sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that choose not to scream." As the young man walked away, Kennedy looked out over the campus, students still filtering out of the building behind him. The sun was setting, the sky glowing with that soft orange light that always feels like a promise. This wasn't about ratings anymore. This wasn't about a show. This was about the story that outlived the noise. A story built not on takedowns, but on truth. A story people would tell again, not because it shocked them, but because it changed them. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. The hashtags cooled. The world, as it always does, moved on to the next scandal, the next spectacle. But something lingered, something slower, quieter, but far more permanent. It wasn't trending, but it was growing. In unexpected places, church basements, break rooms, even grocery lines, people weren't talking about outrage anymore. They were talking about restraint, about empathy, about the night a senator didn't flinch, and a woman finally let go of the mask she'd worn for years. The story didn't vanish. It rooted itself in people's memory, in their behavior. Senator Kennedy felt it every day, not in headlines but in handshakes. In the way a janitor at the airport paused to thank him for holding the line with grace. In the letter from a corrections officer who admitted he'd changed how he spoke to inmates. Even in a stranger's voice on the street who simply said, "You reminded me that you don't have to be loud to be powerful." But one moment stayed with him most. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. He'd been invited to speak at a high school assembly, not a televised event, just a room of students, teachers, and a few parents. The auditorium lights were dim. The chairs were old and squeaky, but the eyes watching him were wide open. He told them the story, not for applause, not as a lesson in humiliation, but as a reminder of the power of composure. He spoke of how the greatest strength sometimes lies in the space between reaction and response. How the moment you choose not to retaliate can echo louder than the harshest insult. When he finished, the room was silent. Then a girl stood up. She was maybe 17. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the mic. She looked directly at him and said, "My mom used to yell. A lot. And I started doing it too. I thought that was how you stayed strong, how you didn't let people walk on you. But when I saw you stay calm on that show, I realized maybe strength is different. So I tried something. Last week my brother broke my phone. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just breathed and talked, and we actually worked it out. That had never happened before." The room didn't erupt in applause. It exhaled. It felt something shift. Kennedy didn't speak right away. He just nodded, his eyes soft, and said, "That moment between impulse and action, that's where real change lives. And you found it." After the assembly, a teacher pulled him aside and said, "You didn't just teach them something tonight. You gave them permission to be better than what they've seen." He drove home in silence that night, windows down, the wind whispering through. It wasn't triumph he felt. It was something quieter, deeper. Purpose. Later, in a final interview, months after the televised breakdown, long after the cameras had packed up, he was asked a simple question. "Senator, what do you think people should remember most about that night?" He leaned back, thoughtful, fingers folded in his lap. "They shouldn't remember who broke down," he said. "They should remember who didn't, and why." The reporter nodded, expecting the interview to end there. But Kennedy wasn't done. "We're living in a time where shouting is mistaken for substance, where humiliation is sold as entertainment, where grace is seen as weakness. But the truth is, grace is a choice, and it's the hardest one you can make when someone comes at you swinging. That night wasn't about politics. It wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to become what tried to destroy you." He looked into the camera, calm, steady, unmistakably sincere. "If you've ever been mocked, ridiculed, or underestimated, I hope you remember this. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to fight dirty to stand tall. The world needs fewer performers and more people who know when to pause." The interview aired quietly. It didn't trend. It didn't need to, because those who needed to hear it did. And some of them are still out there, holding the line in their own quiet way. One breath, one choice, one conversation at a time.